same torture his brother had endured. One more thing they shared, as they had in their younger days. The first beating hadn't been so bad. Before Major Bioya showed up, they kicked and punched him, stomping on his wounded leg a couple of times, but for the most part, they'd refrained from torturing him, waiting to find out what General Ekabela had in mind. The general had sent Bioya. The majority of the rebels were military trained, and many had at one time been of high rank in the government or military, until one of the many coups, and now they were growing marijuana and wreaking havoc, raiding smaller towns and killing everyone who dared to oppose them, or had the farms or land the rebels wanted. No one dared cross into their territory without permission. They were skilled with weapons and in guerrilla warfare, and they liked to torture and kill. They had a taste for it now, and the power drove them to continue. Even the UN avoided the area. If they did try to bring medicine and supplies to the villages, the rebels robbed them. Jack opened his eyes enough to look down at his bare chest, where Major Feehan Bioya had carved his name. Blood dripped, and flies and other biting insects congregated for the feast. It wasn't the worst of the tortures by any means, or the most humiliating. He'd endured it stoically, removing himself from the pain as he had all of his life, but the fire of retribution burned in his belly. Rage ran cold and deep, like a turbulent river hidden beneath the calm surface of his expressionless face. The dangerous emotion poured through his body and flooded his veins, building his adrenaline and strength. He deliberately fed it, recounting every detail of the last interrogation session with Bioya. The cigarette burns, small circles marring his chest and shoulders, the whip marks that had peeled the skin from his back. Bioya had taken his time carving his name deep, and when Jack made no sound, he hooked up battery cables to shock him, and that had been only the beginning of several hours at the hands of a twisted madman. The precise, almost surgical 2-inch cuts covering nearly every inch of his body were identical to what this man had done to his brother, and with each slice, Jack felt his brother's pain, when he could push away his own. Jack tasted the rage in his mouth. With infinite slowness, he eased his hands to the seam of his camouflage pants, fingertips seeking the minute end of the thin wire sewn there. He began to draw it out with a smooth, practiced motion, his brain working all the while with icy precision, calculating distances to weapons, planning each step to get him into the foliage of the jungle. Once there, he was certain of his ability to elude his captors, but he first had to cover bare ground and get through a dozen trained soldiers. The one and only thing he knew without a shadow of a doubt was that Major General Bioya was a walking dead man. 2 soldiers tramped through the camp toward him. Jack felt the coil inside of him winding tighter and tighter. It was now or never. His hands were tied in front of him, but his captors had been careless, leaving his feet free after the last torture session, believing him incapacitated. Bioya had smashed the butt of a rifle into the wound on his leg several times, angry that Jack had given no response. Jack had learned at a very young age never to make a sound, to go somewhere far away in his head and separate mind from body. But men like Bioya couldn't conceive of that possibility. Some men couldn't break, even with drugs in their system and pain racking their bodies. A hand bunched in Jack's hair and yanked hard to bring his head up. Ice-cold water splashed in his face, ran down his chest into the wounds. The second soldier rubbed a paste of salt and burning leaves into the wounds as both laughed. "Major wants his name to show up nice and pretty," one said tauntingly in his native tongue. He leaned down to peer into Jack's eyes. He must have seen death there, the cold rage, the icy determination. He gasped, but was a heartbeat too slow in trying to jerk away. Jack moved fast, a speeding blur of his hands as he looped thin wire around the rebel's neck, dragging him backward off balance, using him as a shield as the other soldier jerked up his gun and fired. The bullet slammed into the first rebel and drove Jack back.